sent to ask me to come, and they can vouch for the truth of it. I marvel that you can be so forgetful." Then, seeing that he could not fool the pale-faces, the old chief laughed merrily, pretending that he had only been joking. But still he held to it that he would give no corn, except in exchange for guns and swords. "Powhatan," answered Smith, "believing your promises to satisfy my wants, and out of love to you I sent you my men for your building, thereby neglecting mine own needs. Now by these strange demands you think to undo us, and bring us to want indeed. For you know well, as I have told you long ago, of guns and swords I have none to spare. Yet steal from you or wrong you I will not, nor yet break that friendship which we have promised each other, unless by bad usage you force me thereto." When the Powhatan heard Smith speak thus firmly, he pretended to give way, and promised that within 2 days the English should have all the corn he and his people could spare. But he added, "My people fear to bring you corn, seeing you are all armed, for they say you come not hither for trade, but to invade my country and take possession of it. Therefore to free us of this fear lay aside your weapons, for indeed here they are needless, we being all friends." With such and many more cunning words the Powhatan sought to make Captain Smith and his men lay aside their arms. But to all his persuasions Smith turned a deaf ear. "Nay," he said, "we have no thought of revenge or cruelty against you. When your people come to us at Jamestown we receive them with their bows and arrows. With you it must be the same. We wear our arms even as our clothes." So seeing that he could not gain his end, the old chief gave in. Yet one more effort he made to soften the Englishman's heart. "I have never honored any chief as I have you," he said with a sigh. "Yet you show me less kindness than anyone. You call me father, but you do just as you like." Smith, however, would waste no more time parleying, and gave orders for his men to fetch the corn. But while he was busy with this, the Powhatan slipped away and gathered his warriors. Then suddenly in the midst of their business, Smith and 1 or 2 others found themselves cut off from their comrades, and surrounded by a yelling crowd of painted savages. Instantly the Englishmen drew their swords, and, charging into the savages, put them to flight. Seeing how easily their warriors had been routed, and how strong the Pale-faces were, the savage chiefs tried to make friends with them again, pretending that the attack upon them was a mistake, and that no evil against them had been intended. The Englishmen, however, put no more trust in their words, and sternly, with loaded guns and drawn swords in hand, bade them to talk no more, but make haste and load their boat with corn. And so thoroughly cowed were the savages by the fierce words and looks of the Pale-faces that they needed no second bidding. Hastily laying down their bows and arrows, they bent their backs to the work, their one desire now being to get rid as soon as possible of these fierce and powerful intruders. When the work was done, however, it was too late to sail that night, for the tide was low. So the Englishmen returned to the house in which they lodged, to rest till morning and wait for high water. Meanwhile the Powhatan had by no means given up his desire for revenge. And while the Englishmen sat by their fire he plotted to slay them all. But as he talked with his braves, Pocahontas listened. And when she heard that the great Pale-face chief whom she loved so dearly was to be killed, her heart was filled with grief, and she resolved to save him. So silently she slipped out into the dark night, and trembling lest she should be discovered, was soon speeding through the wild lonesome forest towards the Englishmen's hut. Reaching it in safety, she burst in upon them as they sat in the firelight, waiting for the Powhatan to send their supper. "You must not wait," she cried. "You must go at once. My father is gathering all his force against you. He will indeed send you a great feast, but those who bring it have orders to slay you, and any who escape them he is ready with his braves to slay. Oh, if you would live, you must flee at once." And as she spoke the tears ran down her cheeks. The Englishmen were truly grateful to Pocahontas for her warning. They thanked her warmly, and would have laden her with gifts of beads and colored cloth, and such things as the Indians delighted in, but she would not take them. "I dare not take such things," she said, "for if my father saw me with them he would know that I had come here to warn you, and he would kill me." So with eyes blinded by tears, and her heart filled with dread, she slipped out of the fire-lit hut and vanished into the darkness of the forest, as suddenly and silently as she had come. Left alone, the Englishmen, cocking their guns and drawing their swords, awaited the coming of the foe. Presently 8 or 10 lusty fellows arrived, each bearing a great platter of food steaming hot and excellent to smell. They were very anxious that the Englishmen should at once lay aside their arms and sit down to supper, but Captain Smith would take no chances. Loaded gun in hand, he stood over the messengers and made them taste each dish to be certain that none of them were poisoned. Having done this he sent the men away. "And bid your master make haste," he said, "for we are ready for him." Then the Englishmen sat down to supper, but they had no thought of sleep, and all night long they kept watch. Powhatan too kept watch, and every now and again he would send messengers to find out what the Englishmen were about. But each time they came the savages found the Englishmen on guard, so they dared not attack. At last day dawned, and with the rising tide the Englishmen sailed away, still to all seeming on friendly terms with the wily Indians. Smith had now food enough to keep the colony from starvation for a short time at least, but his troubles were by no means over. The Indians were still often unfriendly, and the colonists themselves lazy and unruly. Some indeed worked well and cheerfully, but many wandered about idly, doing nothing. At length it came about that 30 or 40 men did all the work, the others being simply idle loiterers. Seeing this, Smith called all the colonists together one day and told them that he would suffer the idleness no longer. "Every one must do his share," he said, "and he who will not work shall not eat." And so powerful had he grown that he was obeyed. The idle were forced to work, and soon houses were built and land cleared and tilled. At length there seemed good hope that the colony would prosper, but now another misfortune befell it. For it was found that rats had got into the granaries and eaten nearly all the store of corn. So once again expeditions set forth to visit the Indians and gather more from them, but their supply too was running short. Harvest was still a long way off, and all the colonists could collect was not enough to keep them from starvation. So seeing this, Smith divided his men into companies, sending some down the river to fish, and others into the woods to gather roots and wild berries. But the lazy ones liked this little. They would have bartered away their tools and firearms to the savages for a few handfuls of meal rather than work so hard. They indeed became so mutinous that Smith hardly knew what to do with them. But at length he discovered the ringleader of these gluttonous loiterers. Him he worthily punished, and calling the others together he told them very plainly that any man among them who did not do his share should be banished from the fort as a drone till he mended his ways or starved. To the idlers Smith seemed a cruel taskmaster. Still they obeyed him. So the colony was held together, although in misery and hunger, and without hope for the future. At length one day to the men on the river there came a joyful sight. They saw a ship slowly sailing towards them. They could hardly believe their eyes, for no ship was expected, but they greeted it with all the more joy. It was a ship under Captain Samuel Argall, come, it is true, not to bring supplies, but to trade. Finding, however, that there was no hope of trade, Captain Argall shared what food he had with the famished colonists, and so for a time rescued them from starvation. He also brought the news that more ships were setting out from home, bringing both food and men. In June, 1609, this fleet of 9 ships really did set out, but one ship was wrecked on the way. Another, the Sea Venture, was cast ashore on the Bermudas. Only 7 arrived at length at Jamestown, bringing many new colonists. Unfortunately, among these new arrivals there were few likely to make good colonists. They were indeed for the most part wild, bad men, whose friends had packed them off to that distant land in the hope of being rid of them forever. They were, said one of the old colonists who wrote of them, 10 times more fit to spoil a commonwealth than either to begin one or but help to maintain one. Now with all these unruly gallants poured into his little commonwealth, Smith found his position of president even more difficult than before. Still, for a time, if he could not keep them altogether in order, he at least kept them in check. Then one day by a terrible accident his rule was brought to a sudden end. He was returning from an expedition up the James River.